because I did it in 6 days. Later in Exodus chapter 31, verse 17, God said, it's a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested. If the earth is billions of years old, God lied when he said he rested on the seventh day. Because it wasn't the seventh day. It was the X number bazillionth day, you know. So I think it's accusing God of either not being able to tell time or simply lying to say that the earth is billions of years old. And I don't think it's heresy to think the earth is old. I think it's heresy to teach there was death before sin. On that one, I'll stand my ground. Okay.
All right, we're taking a break now, and so if you have questions, if you've written them on a 3x5 card, if you can hand them to one of the people at the exits, and then they'll make sure that I get them, and part of the second half will be allowing questions from the audience. When I say allowing questions, we'll review the cards. So thanks. We're going to take a 10-minute break. Dr. Hovind, it's your turn to ask Jayman a question.
Yes, sir. Is the God of the Bible capable of creating in 6 days? Could it have been 6 days, 6,000 years ago? And could it be that he did leave us an accurate record in the Bible of how he did it, so that the average person can read this record and not need to have a physics PhD explain it to him? In other words, the average person reading the Bible, in my opinion, is not going to come up with billions of years, okay? So do we have to have a guru tell us what this book says, i.e. a cult leader, or can the average person read it? So my question is kind of complex, but could God have done it in 6 days, 6,000 years ago, and left us an accurate record, and the average person can read it and understand it? Or why is 99% of the Christians wrong about this, I guess? I'm trying to figure out.
Sure. Well, first of all, I guess I don't agree that 99% of Christians agree on this, but even if they did, that wouldn't be good enough for me, because our measure is what is true and what's called for in the Scriptures. So the question is, if the average person can kind of understand what it means, what's buried in that, in my view, is the assumption that the simplest interpretation is always right. And we could say that, yes, if we gave the Bible to somebody who had never seen it before, had no education, they could read it and find that it must be the familiar days that I'm familiar with, the 24-hour days. Well, that's true. They would probably do that. And they would also interpret many other passages of the Bible wrong, most likely. That's why we have discipleship, we have missions, we have churches. That's why we have theologians. We need help. We don't just take the most plain meaning. Some things are more complex than others. So we do our best with the evidence that we have. Sometimes it is very easy to interpret. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we get the wrong idea, such as in Revelation 1:7, where it says that he will, well, let's go to it here. Then I saw the four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, and they called the four winds. You could take that literally. In fact, Calvin and Luther did. They held that to literally mean that the earth is flat. Okay? So, yeah, we could always take the most familiar interpretation or the easiest to access, and sometimes we'd be right, sometimes we'd be wrong. But it was scientific observation, better science, not better exegesis, that helped Christians in the church to change their view on the flat earth. And same thing with geocentrism, where you had scriptures that pointed to the rising of the sun and the sun going around the earth. It was a figurative language. We don't take that literally anymore, but there was a time that we did, that many Christians did, and they were wrong about it. I don't think there's anybody here who believes that the earth is flat and goes around, or that the sun goes around the earth. So we need the help of scientists and Christians and pastors, and in all these disciplines, we need to do the best that we can to find out what's happening there. So that's my very long answer.
Okay, as a follow-up to that then, that sort of is a red herring, which is an argument used to draw attention away from the question that's asked. The fact that other passages of Scripture are obviously figurative does not really mean anything as far as the Genesis passage. Is the Genesis passage then, my question I guess was, is God capable of doing it in 6 days? Could it be only 6,000 years old? And could it be the Genesis account is not figurative, but actually 6 days?
Yeah. Yes.
It could be.
Yes, it absolutely could be. God could have done it in an instant. Okay. Or he could have done it in 100 billion years. He could have made Adam's skin blue. But the account doesn't mention that. It doesn't get into those specifics. We don't have any reason to believe that Adam was blue, right? I mean, there's a lot of other things that it doesn't tell us. So, yes, it's possible. God could have done many things, but there's not evidence, or the evidence doesn't support, in my view, that he did it in 6 24-hour days.
So what I shared earlier about the trees being made before the sun and the insects being made after the sun, and about Adam being 130 when Seth was born and no death till Adam sinned, you keep saying there's no evidence from Scripture. I think I gave a lot of evidence from Scripture that points to 6,000 years ago. That's what the dates add up to. That's what Christians through history have taught by the thousands. I think probably many people in this room would say they see it as it's obvious. It was 6 days, 6,000 years ago. But so they're all wrong?
I'm not going to say for sure if they are or aren't. I interpret it differently. Again, it's man's interpretation of science, man's interpretation of the Scriptures that is fallible. So, yes, there's evidence. What does the evidence tell us? And in my view, the evidence is consistent with science in Genesis that it was very old and that there was time for the whole thing. So, yep, sorry.
All right, we're going to move on and have Jayman ask a question of Dr. Hovind.
Well, okay, we kind of covered some of these, but I would like to hear you talk about this a little bit more. My understanding of the young earth idea of literal, what the word literal means, is that literal is that which would be most obvious or most familiar to the average person, maybe a young child or an uneducated believer or somebody in the mission field, for instance. Therefore, a literal rendering of day would be the kind of day that is most familiar to that kind of person. So my question goes back to Revelation 7:1. I have two of them. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds. And Psalm 91:4 says, "He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge." So, using these passages and reading them literally, how would you describe the shape of the earth, and how would you describe God?
Well, as far as the shape of the earth, I think we still talk about the compass having 4 points, north, south, east, west, and it appears that there are 4 bulges to the earth. There was an article in National Geographic a few months ago, about a year ago maybe, about the earth does have 4 spots that are higher than other spots. They don't know why. Like it's near Hawaii, the water's quite a bit higher. I don't know about the corner of the earth, but I think it's very common in every language to speak with, use metaphors and similes. When I say I'm hungry as a horse, or he's grouchy as a bear, or something like that, I think it's quite obvious in the context that it's not to be taken literally. I just don't see anything in the Genesis context that makes us not want to take it literally. Why would God start off with an allegory? Then how do we trust any of the book? And plus, Jesus referred back to Genesis 25 times and never once even implied that it wasn't literally true as written 6 days. When he said the creation of Adam was the beginning, he didn't say just the beginning of mankind. He said that was the beginning. I don't see any problem here. To me, it's quite obvious to the average reader that it's 6 days. Yeah.
So to that point, you mentioned the average reader.